name is Kathleen D'Amico, and thank you for joining us this evening. We are thrilled to be here with our special speaker this evening, Kate Whalen, and my colleague, Amy Tadamichi, will be helping us out with this evening's webinar, helping us out with the chat and the Q&A. Kate is a critical reflection expert and is a three-time McMaster grad with more than a decade of leadership experience. She's also an award-winning educator and a top 40 under 40 award recipient. Amy will be posting Kate's full bio in the chat for more information. Please submit any questions that you might have for Kate in the Q&A box below, and we will try to get to as many as possible through various points during the webinar. And when the webinar closes this evening, there will be a link to a short survey that we hope you will take a few moments to complete to share your thoughts with us about tonight's webinar. Now, I know that Kate has a lot of great information to share with us this evening. So without any further delay, I'm going to hand it over to you, Kate.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm going to share my slides with you here. All right, it's great to be here tonight talking to my fellow McMaster alumni. I wear a few different hats at Mac. My main role is as the Associate Director for McMaster's Academic Sustainability Department. I'm also an adjunct professor and course instructor. And one of the topics that has been constant through over a decade and a half of my work, my teaching, my research, and my life has been the role of reflection in learning through experience. So I'm very excited to be here with you tonight to explore learning, growing, and transforming through reflection. And so during this session, I'm going to provide a bit of background about learning through experience and reflection for transformation. And then I'm going to take you through a workshop where you'll actually write your own reflection to help move you towards your goals for transformation. And so I'll provide some opportunities for asking questions throughout, and we'll also have some time for discussion at the end. But first, a story. This story is how I failed as a leader, had my team walk off the job, and how I transformed through engaging in critical self-reflection. Several years ago, I was planning for my 7-year-old niece, Hannah, to come over for the day. Hannah is wildly creative. She's an artist and a storyteller. She likes to do things her own way, often against the grain. And she's a straight shooter. She will always tell you her honest opinion. And Hannah is on my husband's side of the family. And at the time, I had known her for only about a year. And I wanted to make our day together great, fun and educational. And I could already see her at the end of the day thinking about how much fun she had with her cool Aunt Kate. And the day came and I showed Hannah that we'd be making a cake. And I had the sprinkles, the icing sugar, the measuring cups, the aprons, and the recipe all ready to go. But as we got going, Hannah wanted to omit the baking powder. And she only agreed to the egg if she could be the one to crack it into the bowl herself. So I was hesitant and I explained to her the importance of baking powder to help the cake rise, and that I would be cracking the egg to keep the shells out of the batter. And several minutes later, while I was showing her how to crack the egg, Hannah walks out of the kitchen to go color in the other room. And I was like, hey, aren't you going to finish this cake with me? And she replies back in the kindest, most matter-of-fact way and says, oh, I don't like that kind of cake. And I don't know if you've ever had an experience where, there's emotions bubbling up and you know that there's some learning to be had here. And so I sat with Hannah on the couch as she colored and I wrote down some reflections. And a few minutes into the process, I went from feeling really defensive and disappointed to feeling really grateful to Hannah, because not everyone would be so honest to walk out on me when I'm acting like a jerk. You see, I had assumed that the most important part was the outcome of a beautiful, delicious, by-the-book cake. But here's what I heard Hannah say. It's no fun to create something with you. You don't actually involve me in the decisions or the process. When you don't allow me to be meaningfully participate, and when you don't value my ideas. And I could think of a few occasions in my academic and my professional life where I took over projects so that I could control the direction and the outcomes. again, assuming that that was the most important part. And I'm lucky that my team members didn't walk off those projects. But I started to think about the power of learning through experience. You see, I could tell Hannah about the need for baking powder, or I could let her experience what happens when you don't add it. Also, does anyone know how to take a piece of an eggshell out of the yolk if you accidentally crack some in? You just use another part of the shell to scoop it out, and it attracts the little piece like a magnet. It's magic. And maybe everyone on this call knew about this hack, but I was in my 30s when I learned it. And so I often think about how far ahead Hannah would be in life if she got to experience a failed cracked egg, and we could explore together different ways to get it out and find the most effective way. She would have way better omelets. But you see, Hannah loves creativity and adventure, and that's what she needs most from me. Someone who could take her skateboarding, go-kart racing, and make ridiculous milkshake recipes with her. And now she keeps up with me when we go skateboarding, and her milkshakes are delicious and Pinterest worthy. But the best part is that she always leads the way, and I'm her faithful co-pilot who supports her creativity and sense of adventure in experiential learning. And so the story I just shared with you is an example of experiential learning facilitated by critical reflection. And in this session, I'm going to share with you the recipe that I created for how to create a high quality reflection and get the most from everyday experiences. And I want to pause here, and a couple of things on this point. First is that there are as many ways to reflect as there are cake recipes on the internet. They have different ingredients, and some are more important, like baking powder, while others are a bit more optional, like, I don't know, raisins. So feel free to consider this as the reflection recipe that I developed and refined over several years of research, trial, and error. And the second point is that if the idea of reflection seems at all intimidating, just mentally swap the term reflection for thinking about it, because at the most basic level, that's all we're really doing here. I actually made a note when I was writing my script for a future book titled "The Reflective Learning Framework: A Recipe for Thinking About Things." So, stay tuned. But moving on, I want to do some foundational or explain some foundational concepts for you. And I'm going to preface that there are different versions of these definitions and concepts, and I've chosen the ones that are best suited for our purpose today and that are most widely accepted. So first, what is learning? For our purpose, I'll compare learning and education. So consider that education is something that an instructor or an educator can provide, or that an experience can be educational. But learning is something that happens within the individual. And so we can understand that there are different types of learning. For example, there's learning that takes place in the affective domain through emotions. There's psychomotor, like muscle memory. And there's learning that happens in the cognitive domain through thinking. And within this cognitive domain, at the most basic level is factual knowledge, like remembering terminology and definitions. Next is conceptual knowledge, how information is organized, connected, and functions together. Then there's procedural knowledge of methods and when and how to use them. At the highest level is metacognitive knowledge, which is the ability to think about our own thinking and learn about our own learning, which, as we know, is an individual process. And so we'll practice each one of these in our workshop. Next, what is experiential learning? So several educational philosophers believe that all learning is based in experience. And I think part of this depends on what we think counts as experiential learning. When I was an undergrad, I thought that experiential learning had to be done, out in a field somewhere. But now I have a much broader definition about what counts as an educational experience, like baking a cake with my niece. And this is a widely known view of experiential learning developed by David Cole. And this cycle shows that we have an experience, we reflect on it, we have ideas about it, and then our learning continues through actively pursuing new experiences. And now we have experiences every day. And as noted to the right here, reflection is an important first step in learning from the experience. And so to add on to this, so while Kolb describes the process as a cycle, we can more accurately think of learning as a spiral, in that the cycle continues as our experiences and our learning evolve. And I'll touch on this more later. But as one of my favorite educational philosophers, John Dewey, eloquently puts it, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. So if you're thinking, but hey, I learned through experience just fine, but I rarely, if ever, engage in reflection, just know that, again, reflection can take many forms. And Dewey also says that if the doing, the experience, is of such a nature as to demand our thinking, then learning naturally results. But we don't have to wait for those big experiences that demand our thinking, because reflection as a tool for learning allows us to use any experience as an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to be more effective along the way. And in connection to the theme of this alumni series, I also wanted to talk to you about transformative learning. Simply put, transformative learning happens when we have a change in perspective. And the work of sociologist and educational researcher Jack Meisrow is valuable to our discussion today because he developed the transformative learning theory while studying adult learners. And he found that adult learners don't apply old ways of knowing to new situations. Rather, they take on new perspectives to understand novel situations. And part of our ability as adults to do this is that we can critically reflect on our feelings, our beliefs, our assumptions, and our perspectives. And that happens through our experience and our ability to reflect on those. So as you can see, there are many different educational philosophers and sociologists that we still base many of our teaching and learning philosophies and strategies off of. And they all believe that reflection is a key component in learning. But I've questioned throughout much of my research that if it's so important, why didn't I ever learn about it in school? Now, I think that has changed, that's continuing to change. But if you're like me, you never learned how to reflect. Personally, I learned about reflection after completing my undergraduate degree. I was hired into a management role within a few months after graduation, and my job was to develop McMaster's first university-wide sustainability department. And I was also working on my master's degree. And so reflection wasn't a nice to have, it was a necessity. It was the difference between sink or swim for me. And I had to squeeze all the learning I could from every presentation, report, meeting, conflict, success, if I wanted to keep afloat. And so several years later, when I was developing a new department, which was McMaster's Academic Sustainability Department, it was based in experiential learning. And I realized that reflection was going to be really important, but I didn't know how to formally include it in our curriculum. And it was such a good challenge that, a challenge with untapped potential, actually, that I switched the topic of my PhD thesis to focus on it. And so I've spent over a decade studying the role of reflection in learning and building on the work of Dewey and Kolb and Meisrow and countless others. But most importantly, I learned through my students. By the time I published my first manuscript on the Reflective Learning Framework, or RLF, as I'll be referring to it, it had been used with over 1,000 students. So this work is grounded in both theory and practice. And the outcome of all this research and practice was a practical theory and guide for how educators can help their students learn through reflecting on their experience. And I aligned the reflection criteria to the cognitive skills that educators look for in their assignments. And so in this way, we can use the framework as part of our academic coursework. And so while I developed the theory and practice in the sustainability program that I oversee, it's also used in faculties from engineering to business. And while it was developed for higher education, it's widely applicable to other contexts, including professional practice. And I've modified the RLF for several different applications, and I've done that for you in your workshop tonight. So I've removed all of the academic stuff because I'm not going to be assessing your reflection for marks, but rather I've modified it slightly to highlight the role of reflection in transformative learning. And so the RLF has several components, and we're going to use them to engage in 7 short activities to support transformative learning. The first 2 exercises will help you recount your experience. And then we're going to engage in 3 activities to help consider new perspectives on your experience, kind of like we're looking at an object for the first time and forcing ourselves to look at it from different angles to make sense of it. And then the final 2 exercises aim to support the continuation of the learning process. And before the workshop, let me just see here. I gave you the following summary of transformative learning. It's an act that the individual conducts in order to be more self-motivated, self-governing, rational, collaborative, and empathetic, to name a few. And my assumption is that you likely registered for this workshop because you want to transform in some way and are interested in how reflection can help. So upon registration, I asked you to consider and share with me your responses to the following: the area of life you are seeking transformation in, what transformation looks like for you in 2022, and what success looks like. And there were dozens of comments. They were all awesome. And so I'm going to share a sample of what I received. Looking to be better in tune with my emotions, better at making decisions mindfully and in line with my values. I love that one. Pursuing and staying consistent with creative outlets like music, reading, and writing. Bring more joy, balance, and learn to create opportunities to have meaningful interactions in my imposed remote work life. Living more active, healthy, and a content life. Work, effectively coach my team and mentees. And success is me being less hands-on and my team members experiencing growth. So these are all amazing topics for reflection. So thank you so much for sharing and giving some of those examples. So obviously, some of you may have come into the session with a topic in mind, while others might be thinking about this for the first time, and both are great. But I will encourage you to have a topic or an experience in mind to reflect on during this session, because we will be moving quickly. So I encourage you, choose something that's resonant and meaningful that you can pull from during our session. But I'm going to give you some additional prompting questions. And so you can use this time to either refine the topic that you came in with if you still want to use that one, or if you're thinking about it for the first time, this is also an opportunity to develop your topic that we'll be eventually reflecting on. So I want you to start thinking about your recent experiences, perhaps those related to your transformation goals or anything else that happens to be on your mind lately. So these prompts might be helpful as you develop your topic or your theme. You might think about your most impactful learning, something that surprised you, your biggest takeaway, a challenge you've overcome, an adversity you faced, a challenge you're still struggling with, or something you're most grateful for. So I'm gonna, time you for a minute, but take this minute to take note of what comes to mind as you consider these prompts, and choose something that you can commit to reflect on for this session. So go ahead and take a minute now.
Hey, Kate, while everybody is reflecting, first question is from Carol, and she's wondering if we can share a list of the books and the theorists that you're mentioning.
I'd be happy to.
Perfect. So you can share that with us, and then when we send out the recording, we will provide that to all of our participants tonight.
Great question. Okay, so you probably have a bunch of thoughts and ideas. They may or may not fit together in any meaningful way. If not, that's a-okay. Congratulations, you've done it right. It means there's still something to unpack and to gain new perspectives on. And I want to preface and pause here, because perfection is not the goal. It's just providing a place to start and something to practice with during this session. So now that you have your theme or topic, we're going to work through the reflection components to help you create meaning and deepen your learning. So first on our list is temporal progression. So reflection is an account of an experience at a point in time, which is impacted by lots of things, including our past experience. And here's the thing about learning through experience. No two thoughts are ever the same, because experience always intervenes. You could be sitting in that same seat, taking part in the same workshop 2 years ago or 2 weeks from now, and it would be different. You would think about it differently because you would have had a number of experiences in between that would change your perceptions and your learning. And this ties back to the learning cycle, in that through experience, our ideas and our learning are continually formed and reformed. Now, the first thing that we're going to do, considering your experiences and in light of your topic or your theme, is to create a timeline of important events that have happened along the way. Events could be thoughts or feelings, reactions, experiences, conversations, things you read about. They could be anything. And you can do this however you like. You can make a timeline or jot notes. You could also write a story, however serves you. But to help consider the example I shared with you. So I started my reflection by describing the story in order of the events that took place. And that's all we're really doing now, is making a record of events. So feel free to take a minute now and to make a timeline of events. All right, next on our list is the important aspects of the experience. Now, not everything you describe in your reflection will be truly important, and the criteria for important is if it contributes to your learning. And differentiating the important from the unimportant information will help support clarity of thought and help you focus on the aspects that are most important to your learning. And so we won't take time to do this now, but when you're reviewing your reflection, ask yourself if you've included only the important aspects. And I find that there's typically two situations you'll likely encounter. One is that you see something that's important, but you haven't yet connected it to your learning. And so in that case, spend some time unpacking it and ask, why is this really important to my learning about this experience? Second, you may see something that you've included, but isn't really that relevant, kind of like, an item on the agenda. In that case, you can choose not to focus on that piece as much. But from my experience, some particularly interesting insights come when you write down something and like your gut tells you this was an important part of this experience, but your brain doesn't quite know why yet. So asking, why is that important, and reflecting on that. So from my example, my intention to make the day fun and educational was actually really key to my experience and what I ended up learning from what happened. So I'll touch more on it, but anyways, that was my one example. So you'll know when things are important, so you can kind of dive into those as you see fit. And so while you can surely consider, what's important or what's not important along the way while you're writing, my tip is to actually write freely at first. Let the thoughts and emotions and things come out, and then go back and dive deeper with the questions to help clarify. Next, we're going to start taking different perspectives. Here, we're going to connect our experience to theory. And comparing similarities and differences between theory and practice and extracting the relevant features is helpful to learning and is a good way to promote knowledge transfer between things we know, so through theories, and what we experience in life. And so, while you're very welcome to make it one, this does not have to be an academic exercise. Basically, what do you already know, and how can you use what you know to help make sense of what happened? So in my reflection, I connected my theoretical knowledge about the power of learning through experience which I was not, clearly not offering to Hannah. But it was a way for me to make sense of what I knew from elsewhere, that theory, and then see that information and my experience from new perspectives. So I actually learned more about my theoretical knowledge and my experience by connecting the two of them. And so we're just going to brainstorm about what you already know. You just need to write down enough information to remind you of what you might want to Google or search for later. So maybe it was the author's name or the title, some keywords or key themes, or maybe you remember when or with whom you discussed it with. And if there's nothing that you know or can think about, I also encourage you to seek out new information to continue your understanding. So in this case, what terms will you Google? What journals would you look to? What newspapers or blogs might you read on the topic? So take a minute now and just make some notes about some theories or information that you already know about so that you can search for it later.
Hi, Kate. Another quick question. So, if somebody is struggling to find a theory, can you give us an example from your own experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as you ask that question, I realize that the idea of a theory can seem very academic. So another one I recently had was around, what was the term I ended up finding? Psychological safety. And I actually found it in the Harvard Business Review. There were some situations that seemed to be easier to make mistakes or fail, and other ones playing it really safe and not innovating. And I was interested in some of these experiences and how they were playing out. And I remember hearing about this idea. And so I was searching, and then the articles that came up were about this idea of psychological safety. And it was actually not related to education or management. It was related to tech innovations. Anyways, the one that I was reading, it described how in tech companies, they actually create safe places to fail. They actually foster failure because it keeps us trying new things, rather, being penalized or fear of risk of making a mistake can really be quite stifling to innovation. So that was the theory or the ideas that I actually pulled from. Thank you. Great question. I appreciate that.
Thanks for that, Kate.
All right. And next on our list is relating to other contexts. So similarly, while we can use our existing knowledge about things we've read or we know about, we can also use our own past experience to make sense of new situations. So relating information from one context to another can help create distance between the information and the specific context, which also supports knowledge transfer. It's kind of like practicing a math problem in a lab and acing it on the test, but not knowing how to solve the problem when you see it in real life. So for effective transfer and application, we need to be able to understand the concepts separate from the situation that they occurred in. Similarly, this idea of detaching the concepts from the situation will allow you to see those concepts as objects to reflect on and make sense of. And then once you have them as concepts, you can actually take them around and use them kind of like tools and new knowledge. It makes this kind of tacit know-how knowledge more explicit and available for use. So think of an explicit or a specific example from about the concept from another situation. So it could be another workshop, your community work, or your social life. For me, in my example, it was a couple of the work projects that I thought back to and realized how I was also taking control of them. So I could kind of see some similarities of why I did those, and the fears I had about getting control and wanting direction, which was also quite similar to my fears of I don't know, miscracked eggs or something. So that's one example you can connect to find your own other concept and context for that conceptual knowledge. And so I want you to pick out the relevant aspects relating to two events and then compare them to dissect similarities or differences. Basically, this is just another way to understand your experience and how your conceptual knowledge from one situation can be transferred and applied to another. So feel free to take a minute now and jot down some ideas. All right, next on our list, this is one of my favorites, is personal thoughts and feelings. So one of the first important steps here is to recognize that you think and feel differently than everyone else, and to understand that our thoughts and our feelings are impacted by our personal values, beliefs, biases, our assumptions about the world. And recognizing how our thoughts and feelings are shaped when reflecting on them as events can support the act of critical reflection and support the process of transformative learning, so the ability to take new perspectives. Furthermore, reflecting on our personal thoughts and feelings and how they're involved in our learning provides that, really deep individual connection to the experience. And this uniquely individualized aspect of experiential learning supports that metacognition, or the awareness and understanding of our own individual thought process. So for my example, the part about how I really wanted to make the day educational was important because learning is one of my highest values. My assumption was that controlling the outcome was the best approach, even though I knew better, but it was in conflict with my value and my intention for the day. And that's what made it feel so horrible and why I got so defensive when Hannah called me out on it. So I'm going to give you a minute, but here you'll do more than state your thought and feeling. You'll also attribute the underlying point of view, bias, value, or assumption that contributed to that feeling. Personally, I find it helpful to imagine that someone else had the exact same experience, but felt different about it. And I consider, so what was it about me that made me feel that way? So take a minute now and tune into one of your thoughts and feelings on your experience. All right, next up, final two. Other possible responses. So in these last two, we're going to really start to think about the continuation of the learning process. So here, reflecting on events and reframing the problem will also help create alternative responses and support the creative thinking to find new ways of doing or seeing things. And this process is great because it involves divergent and creative thinking. For my example, I chose to see Hannah's curiosity and creativity as the things to lean into and to help foster, rather than the things to control. So you can start by distinguishing the issue to be addressed, and then consider, what's another approach or perspective? As a tip, consider your previously mentioned biases or assumptions, and then imagine an alternative way of thinking or being with that. So take a minute now. All right. And last on our list, planning and future practices. So, generating ideas and creating plans to see this experience through will support that continued learning through new experiences. And through this process, that next phase of the experiential learning cycle has begun. So, consider, how can you apply what you've learned through this experience? And how can you continue your learning? My tip is to be as specific as possible with your ideas and plans. I find that this supports the learning process by applying what you've learned, even if it's just applying the idea as a start. It also helps support with follow through. The more specific we are about our plans and our actions, the more likely we are to see them through. So take a minute now and jot down how you're going to continue your learning. And so there you go. You've set the foundation for your transformative learning through reflection. So you can spend some time, after the session and unpack your thoughts while they're still fresh. But you also might want to come back in a day or two once you've had time to let things percolate. But there are several frameworks for reflection and prompts online. So feel free to go and Google and find out what else is out there. But also, if you want to use the RLF in your classroom or your life, all the resources that I've created as part of my work can be found online. So for example, we have this cheat sheet. This is what my students use as their cheat sheet slash rubric when they're marking the reflection. It's a 2-page handout which takes them through all the reflective learning framework criteria. But I'd love to hear your insights. What was challenging? What was impactful? I'm happy to take any questions about reflection or otherwise.
That was great. Thank you, Kate. We do have a few questions. So when people are reflecting, is it best to go through all of those RLF components in that order, or can they pick and choose?
That's a good question. Yes, there's absolutely no requirement to go through it in order. I find it's a bit systematic, especially if you're new to reflection or wanting to do a really deep dive. I still use this when I need to reflect on something quite meaningful to me. But I often sometimes just take one of the pieces. If I take out just one at a time, it's almost always the thoughts and feelings one, because there's just so much information that we can learn from our emotions, from our the physical sensations when we have an experience. So I usually pick that one. And if I don't go to the reflective learning framework and I'm making a reflection and I go and check, the one I often forget is planning and future practices. And so I always have to be, even myself, have to be reminded, okay, what am I actually going to do to continue this learning, to seek out a new experience, take what I know and kind of move it forward. So, but I've modified this for our first year students. I have to say, our first year students, often they're coming from the sciences or engineerings where they are taught you do not write in first person. So having them write in first person and about their thoughts and feelings, I'm not too concerned about them going through the deep dive of attributing the underlying, assumption about the world. If they include a thought or a feeling, they get the full mark. So it's really modifiable for different levels of study and to pick and choose going through. Thanks for the question.
That's very helpful. We have another question. How do you know when your own reflection process is complete?
Mm-hmm. So there's I wish I could remember the quote or who said it, but there's this idea that unlearning or non-learning is actually when we believe that we're done learning. So the idea of like a test and says, okay, you now know all there is to know about this topic, is actually a sign that learning has stopped. There's no more to learn. So I like to think, that spiral approach, how our learning is always evolving as our ideas about life and our experiences educate us and make us attuned to new ways of thinking and seeing the world. So I would say it's never done. It's continually building the ship while you're flying it. But I hope that is exciting, that the learning never stops. And so yeah, I teach a course at Mac, and I always ask my students there's one class in the semester where I say, come to class with your personal definition of leadership. And so I always bring mine, and every single year it's changed a little bit. And so I love it that my definition of how I see myself and others and leadership is continuing to evolve. And I personally hope it never stops.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone has a question for Kate, feel free to put it in the Q&A box. I know the John Dewey quote at the beginning really got me. And I've been reflecting on that, that we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on that experience. So that's just really resonated with me.
Yeah, no, I find it interesting. I mean, there was many times where I had experiences that I didn't reflect on, and I somehow would repeat a lesson that I should have learned. So the reflection piece, I learned that early on in my career, that if I just do that, things end up, being a lot more effective. Going down that road a little bit smoother.
Absolutely. So we have a couple more questions coming
Wonderful.
in. Do you do the reflection process every day or just based on the event?
Good question. Good question. I will say I reflect every day. I love to journal. So it looks different each day. On average, I probably go through a deep reflection at least once every 2 weeks. I have some people in my world, I have a coach, so I'm continually bringing them information. And so I have a lot of reflection through that. But there are often times in my life where I'm going through a big transition or taking on something really new, really novel, where I find I want to do a lot more reflection to make an easier go of it and to help me move ahead more effectively, more quickly, make it more enjoyable. So I find if I don't, sometimes I feel a little stuck. So personally, I do it a lot, but there's definitely ebbs and flows.
Yeah, so any other tips, Kate, on how we can make it a regular part of the learning process?
I mean, however you want to reflect that way. And if you don't know, try a bunch of different ways. If it's a note on your phone, if you want to get a great journal, if you want to type things out, the one thing I will recommend is to externalize it. So things can be different when they stay inside, but when we write it out, or if you can even talk about it to a neutral third party, which sometimes those people are hard to find. They come in, it's almost as like keeping it in your brain. But if you can externalize it in some way, that's gonna likely be a more effective approach to gaining new insights from your experience. So I would say go try it out. Try finding a book or a time. Carve out some time for yourself as well, because as you can see, a deep reflection does take some time away from distractions, where you can just think and express, no judgment, and kind of let those reflective juices flow.
Awesome. Some really great questions that are coming in here. Do you see a difference between reflection on action and reflection in action?
Yeah, yeah. This is great. There is Donald Shawn, I think, was the theorist that actually did a lot of work in reflection in action. And it's an incredible skill to be able to, when you're in the midst of say a meeting or that engagement with a colleague or your child or something, to be able to reflect and have almost like the view of yourself when you're in it. Super challenging, but an incredible skill to be able to pause and have that that attention on how you're being and how you're feeling and how you're interacting. And so that's a really valuable skill to develop. I do think it is different to reflecting, when the action is done and over with. I think when we look back, the time to pause, and as I mentioned, the time to externalize things, in my experience, and also what I've read, the things to the time and to externalize can really help frame things and give pause and new perspective.
Another good question. With this insight from reflection, how can you be successful implementing new actions, positive habits, and not just relapsing?
Yeah, good. So this is, I don't know any theory on this, but from experience, it's actually quite incredible when you can learn something through just thinking about it and saying, wow, I never knew I cared so much about that. Or, my experience with my niece, I was making this not fun. Like once I realized that, it almost, I didn't even need to try. I knew my next experience because it was so vivid. I had spent some time and I could pinpoint the things that were causing me to be ineffective in connecting with my niece. And so it's almost like, once you shed a light into a corner, it's no longer dark, if that makes sense. And so reflection can often just shed light on new learning that can be quite vivid and resonant to take with you going forward.
That does make sense. Thanks for that. Another question. As a trainer or an educator, how might you convince or effectively suggest that others can learn well from this process
Mhm.
in this crazy, fast-paced world of progress management? Sometimes people are just overwhelmed by that word, reflect.
Totally. I mean, I experienced this a lot in the classroom, especially when I was first getting going. So I did some grounded theory research to create the first framework. And then I tried it in the classroom and the students didn't like it in the beginning. And it didn't work. And part of that was the way I delivered it, not just the framework. But that was the most important. Then later on, I did some inter-rater reliability and comparative means and made sure it actually worked in the marking realm. But the most important one to me was, are students actually going to enjoy this process? Are they going to want to reflect? Because if they don't want to continue doing it, that's the most important thing, then I've ultimately failed at doing something that I set out to do. But we found out that they did really like it, and they liked it because they felt like they learned. And I think that can be often overlooked, right? I engage in lots of pedagogical research and reading on this. And sometimes we think, oh, if students knew that their grade were going to be 10% higher if they study this way. And you ask students, was your grade higher? Yes. Did you like it? No, it was painful. It didn't feel like I was learning. I would rather just reread. Even though I know that's not effective, it feels good. And so feeling like you're learning matters. And so students said that was the most important thing. The best quote I found from that body of research was a student who said, or a participant in my research has said, reflection didn't make me learn more. It just made me realize what I had learned. And I was like, that's so important to know what you learned, because if you know what you've
Yeah.
learned, then you can use it. You can continue to grow and apply it. So that was the most important thing. Second to that, if you're an educator, read your student reflections, comment on them. They love it. I had a student recently that said to me, sent me a message and said, I look forward to, when I see it come over, I always wonder if it's your comment on my reflection. they're not worth a lot of marks, the weekly reflections, but they really, really love when you read it, and they feel really horrible if you don't. So I would say those are two really good strategies, to make it feel like they're learning and to actually read and engage with them when they do write them.
That's good guidance on that. Another question here. How do we know that we can trust our memory of the timeline of events?
Right, we probably can't, to be quite honest. But here's the thing: is that is it accurate? Probably less important than if it's how you perceive it, because that's what's going to matter most. Even if it's not accurate, if that's how you believe it to be and how you saw it, that's what you're going to use going forward anyways. So don't worry about it being perfect. There are things that you can do. For example, you can an assumption. You can ask yourself, is this something that if I reflect a mirror back, it is a reflection of reality? Could I touch it, quote it? If there was a recorder in the room, is it actually there? If not, it might be a guess or an assumption. So you can have some checks and balances along the way. If you're like, I think this is how it was, if that's a really important thing, you might want to clarify for yourself is that the thing that the person said exactly, or was that what I heard? Even if it's not perfect, knowing whether or not it's a reflection or what you heard or an assumption of it, that can even be educative in itself. So I don't know the situation, but I hope that was helpful.
That's very true. Okay, it looks like I don't think we have any more questions that are coming in. And I do want to remind everybody that we are recording tonight, and what we will do is once we get this uploaded, we'll send out the recording to everybody. They can watch it through again, and we'll also send through a list of those readings and resources that you referenced, Kate, because I think that was a great question from Carol, and we'll all be interested in seeing that. So I think if there's no more questions for this evening, I just want to thank you so much. And we're getting thank yous coming in through the chat. So obviously you can see that everybody really enjoyed it, Kate. So thank you for your time. And I know I've learned a lot from this hour-long webinar, and I'm sure all of our participants have as well. And I want to thank all of the participants for choosing to spend an hour with us and tuning in. And we hope that when you leave the webinar, a survey will pop up. If you can please take a few moments to share your thoughts with us, that would be great. And I'm just going to check and make sure. Yep. Okay. We're good. No more questions. Just more thanks for you, Kate. So watch for the recording. We will send it out through the email. And hope you all have a great evening. And we look forward to you joining us next time. Thanks again, everybody.